Welcome to Finding Contentment, the official podcast of the American Institute of Stress. The goal of this podcast is to explore the science, psychology, and practical wisdom that can help us manage our stress. If you are looking for personal growth and professional success, or just want a more fulfilling life, visit us at stress.org. And now here is the host and executive director of the American Institute of Stress, Will Heckman.
Hey, greetings, everyone. This is your host and executive director for the American Institute of Stress. It's Will Heckman. I want to thank you once again for joining us. And I also want to remind you that if you're listening to this podcast today, go to stress.org. Make sure you subscribe to our magazines. Contentment magazine just came out. It's really a great issue. Make sure you check it out. It's absolutely free. And as I always do, I'm going to ask you to support our channel. Please hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe below. All you do is get a notification as when a new podcast comes out. So please do that. We really appreciate it. And make sure today that you stay tuned, because we are going to be giving our listeners to this podcast a special code that you can use for 50% off any membership to AIS. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you that code in just a little bit. You know, this podcast, we try to revisit some of the stress predicaments and explore some new approaches to finding our way through it all. And we'll start by refreshing our understanding today of the human stress burden. And I've asked Frank Forencich to join us. Frank has earned his degree at Stanford University in human biology and neuroscience and has over 30 years of teaching experience in martial arts and health education. Frank also holds black belts in rankings. We have that in common, our interest in martial arts and karate and aikido, and has traveled all over the world, including Africa, on several occasions to study human origins and the ancestral environment. He has presented at numerous venues, including Ancestral Health Symposium, Google, the Dr. Robert D. Kahn Heart Conference, and the Institute of Design at Stanford University. And he's a former columnist for Paleo Magazine. Frank is the author of numerous books about health and human predicament, including Beware False Tigers, a great book, and The Enemy is Never Wrong. He's a diplomat member at the American Institute of Stress, and now a frequent contributor to Contentment Magazine. In fact, he just wrote an article for this edition of Contentment Magazine. Make sure you check that out. And also make sure you go to exuberantanimal.com for more information about Frank. And just as I promised, here is the code to get 50% off your membership at any level. And in honor of our guest today, that code is Frank50, Frank 50. Yeah, I know it's not clever, but it does work. And you can use that code for 30 days when you're completing your membership application. All right, so please join me in welcoming my friend, Frank Forencich. Hey, Frank.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad you can join us today. You and I talk about stress all the time. Frank has also done some webinars for us, really popular webinars. By the way, if you're a member, you get to see those for free. Frank, to start out with, I've heard you state that stress, and I agree with you, is one of the most important challenges of our age. Tell us what you meant by that.
Right. Well, this is what I call a pigeonhole problem, because in the popular imagination and popular culture, we tend to think of stress as something that afflicts individuals. And it's hard on our bodies, it's hard on our skin, it's hard on the aging process, all of that. And that's all true. That's all fine and good. But it has profoundly negative effects on larger scales of society and culture, because it changes our perceptions of the world, it changes our cognition, and it changes our behavior. And we need people to be functioning at a high level right now, and stress is working in the other direction. So we need to take it seriously, not just as an individual affliction, but as a social issue as well.
Do you think our age now deals with stress and would I say we have a resilience problem, but more so than it did, let's say, 50 or 100 years ago?
The nature of stress has changed. Whereas it used to be episodic, it used to be occasional. We would have acute bouts of stress, say a
Right.
war or a famine or some sort of disease outbreak or something that would pass. And then we would recover, we would be resilient and go back to normal. But now the nature of our stress has changed to become much more chronic. And there are fewer and fewer avenues of escape now. So yes, our situation has changed dramatically, and yet as a people, we're not really taking it seriously. It's very rare to hear our leaders talk about stress. We talk about the economy, we
Right.
talk about war and conflict, we talk about lots about politics, but rarely do we hear a leader talk about stress. And likewise, we rarely hear our leaders talk about mental health. So that's something that needs to change.
I think that they're starting to talk about it a little bit, but certainly not enough. I mean,
Mhm.
I mean, one of the reasons one of the things I blame on, and you hit the nail right on the head. It is becoming a chronic problem, is because of all the technology. I know what happens in Russia, like as it's happening. Like, when I was a kid, I couldn't find, Kuwait on a map, if you asked me to. So I think technology makes the world a smaller place. So we take in all the problems a lot more. It's a lot more than just our local community. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
Right, and that's so historically abnormal
Mm,
because if you think about our hunting and gathering experience, all stress would have been local. So you would have had maybe a stressful encounter with a wildfire or a predator or another tribe, but that was always like right here
right.
in your valley or your watershed or wherever it was. And now we get to we get to experience stress over the entire planet, and we're not really equipped for that.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk to you about that because you I was listening to one of your presentations and we talked about the different how we're not ready for that. And as you know, AIS has produced a great documentary. Everyone should watch it called Mismatch. It really does open your eyes. And how does the concept of this mismatch between our evolution, and the demands of modern life, how we're not prepared for it, I want to know how that contributes to our stress. Like you said, it used to be episodic. And are there, I don't even know if there's an answer to this question, Frank, but are there some practical strategies for addressing this mismatch? We have not caught up. Our bodies are 10,000 years ago were, were about right, episodic, and, we can get over it. Today, it's
Right,
constant.
right. Yeah, I think the first step in all of this is to recognize the extremity of our predicament and how different the modern environment really is. A lot of people in the world of biology talk about our modern life as an alien environment. And if you start making a list of all the alien qualities of the modern environment, you come up with a pretty long list. It's an alien physical environment, it's an alien social environment, it's an alien nutritional environment, it's an alien informational environment, all of it. And of course, it's an alien stress environment.
Right.
And so we feel anxiety, we feel depression, we feel all these afflictions, and we're very quick to blame ourselves. We say, "Oh, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, I'm struggling to adapt. There must be something wrong with me." But the biologists would say, "Well, there's really not something wrong with you at all. It's that you're living within this system that is putting these extreme demands on your body." And that's kind of a liberating view
Yeah.
because there's really nothing wrong with you in most cases.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are some cases where there are organic diseases,
Right.
but in general, for most of us, most of the time, we're suffering, and we're suffering because of the context, the predicament that we're living in.
And everyone is different. Yeah, I mean, one of the main issues about stress is everyone deals with it different, manages it differently. It's a very individual kind of thing. Um, you're right. I don't know if if in general you can say, but okay, so you and I are very aware of the world of stress because we're in that field. But the average person working their job, feeling the stress all the time, do they put a finger on it? Say, okay, I'm just feeling stressed because it's not me, it's just this. Or do you think their go-to for them is to say, you know, I remember, okay, so I remember saying when I was in education, saying to a superintendent, hey, it is a lot on our plate. His response was, get a bigger plate. Do you think that we really recognize that it's okay, you can't just get a bigger plate?
Right.
Sometimes you got to
But
manage this stuff.
it's only 24 hours in the day.
Right.
And the people have um, a limited capacity for dealing with this stuff. And this is very much the frog in the boiling water, because we adapt, we get better, we adjust, and then the stress keeps coming. So we adjust again and we adjust again. And we keep adjusting until there's some sort of crisis, or our performance is so degraded that we can't function. So yeah, it kind of creeps up on us. It's not really like a predator attack in a hunter-gatherer setting. It's more like rising sea levels. It kind of comes on us a little bit at a time.
It's your boss saying, hey, can you go be part of this committee too?
Right.
What?
Right.
You talk about the standard stress narrative and how it falls short in providing any relief for people, individuals experience stress. Tell us about that. Tell us about maybe some alternative approaches, or they can give us some more effective solutions.
Right. Well, the standard stress narrative, and this is what we see in the popular press, is that stress is an individual problem with individual solutions. And that's true as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. We need to think in terms of our setting, our context, our predicament. And so this calls for action on a wider scale. So it's not enough just to take, say, individual students in a school or individual workers in a workplace and then offer them, say, a meditation class or something. You have to look at the demands that are placed on them by the system itself. The individual strategies can help us cope in the short term, but they're not nearly sufficient for the big picture. The analogy I often use is that imagine you put your dog in a garage and you leave your dog in the garage. That's an alien environment for your animal. And you leave him there. You feed him on occasion, but you leave him out there for weeks or months at a time. And then you go back out and you visit your dog. And of course, that dog's going to have health problems. And he's going to have mental health problems too. And the question you have to ask, is there something wrong with your dog? And the shallow answer, the superficial answer is to say, well, yes, there is something wrong. Let's bring in a vet, let's medicate the dog and get him over the afflictions. But the other answer, and I think the deeper answer here is, no, there's really nothing wrong with your dog at all. This is the way mammals respond to living in a high stress alien environment. So you got to change the garage. Changing the dog itself is not enough.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're stress can be environmental. If you're living in the wrong place, also cultural, because some cultures stress relief is part of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
If you look into, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you know much more about this than I do, but some cultures, meditation, exercise, even downtime is part of their culture, is part of their life. It's whether it's taking a siesta or practicing Tai Chi in the morning, or
hmm hmm
being taught how to meditate when you're 5.
Right.
Those cultures, that's built into that stress relief is built into it. I think American culture is partially to blame for the stress epidemic and the resilience problem we have.
Right.
We don't address it.
And this hero worship we have for the,
Mm.
for example, the entrepreneur who works, 20 hours a day and doesn't sleep and just pushes and pushes and pushes. We glorify that. And that's a mistake.
Yeah.
That is antithetical to what we're trying to do here.
And it's okay for if that's an anomaly and that's the exception to the rule. But to
Mhm.
think everyone can do that,
Right. Right. Yeah.
that's a mistake.
We have to honor the body. And some of this goes back again to our hunting and gathering ancestry. There's a book out there, it's no longer in print, but it's called The Paleolithic Prescription. And these modern American physicians went to Africa and they spent time with the Kalahari Bushmen. And what they noticed was a rhythmic pattern of engagement. So the Bushmen, you don't have to work that hard in the bush because there's actually food all around you. And so they would go out to hunt and gather, and they'd be gone for a day or 2 or maybe 3, and then they would come back to camp and they would rest up for 2 or 3 or 4 days. That's the normal pattern for human beings. They called it the Paleolithic rhythm. And we see that reflected in some indigenous societies today, but that's who we are. That's the
Right.
way we should design our workplaces and our schools and everything else to have some sort of rhythmic pattern to it, and we don't.
It's, in schools they talk about doing it.
Right.
Some schools talk about doing 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off, no summer vacations and things like that. You do 6 weeks on it. I mean, in lower grades, not just colleges. So it's interesting that you say that because, you do your work and then you rest.
Right.
And, it's not like that anymore. And you're right about the glorifying the hard worker. That's like a badge of honor.
Right.
It's really bad when we do it to women. I
Yes.
just had a conversation in the last podcast about that, because they also have to be moms. And women today are really put upon because if they go into a profession, let's say, I had a conversation with a young lady who's a doctor. She's an MD, and I said, "Well, when you're done with residencies, interns, and everything, how old are you?" And she said, "Well, around 30."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What's the age most women want to have a baby these days?" Around 30. So it's a real, that's a struggle that they have to deal with. Okay, so we talk about individuals, but I want to talk a little bit more globally as a community, as a society, because you brought that up before. And we also talk, you and I, about the ecological crisis that intersects with our experience of stress or something like that. And what are the implications when we have a crisis, even if it's a perceived crisis, it's an actual crisis? What are the implications for both individuals and also as a society? I mean, our community as a whole.
Right. And that's a big question
Yeah, I
because
know.
there's so much
That's why I gave it to a big guy.
well, there's so much uncertainty involved in all of this right now because it's a very unique situation, historically speaking. I mean, we've always been you might say, a minor species on the planet, and
Yeah.
now we're like a geologic force on the planet. And not only that, but there's so much acceleration to change right now. And this is another historical perspective that's essential because if you put yourself down at any point in human history, you wouldn't see that much change from generation to generation. If you're a hunter gatherer, you can basically expect that your children would have a life almost identical to your own, and you could teach them to live in that world. Change was slow. But now change is so fast that it's hard to even imagine what's coming next year. And that rate of change is so intimidating for the human animal. It's ambiguous, it's uncertain, and even the facts by themselves don't really have the impact. What's really driving our stress right now is the uncertainty of what's coming. And that's felt acutely by young people, because young people now are saying, I don't even know if I'm going to have a future. I
Right.
don't even know if I'm going to have a functional future. And so the stress, again, it's not just chronic, but it's escalating because of this acceleration. And we have to find ways to step out of that somehow, uh, through triage, through saying no, through trying to isolate and insulate ourselves from that pace of change.
What about just awareness? I mean, the younger, I do talk to a lot of younger people too, and they're very concerned about things I don't have an answer for. Like, they come out of college in such financial debt that it's crushing. They worry about ever being able to afford a home themselves. I mean, things like that.
Mhm.
And they worry about the environment. They worry about politics. And I'm thinking, oh my God, relax. I don't want to say that because that's really rude. Just relax, But you're right. It's been accelerating. I think about it, and we have a lot of younger listeners and a
Mhm.
lot of younger viewers. And I, I I have seen in our lifetime, I've gone from black and white TV
Mhm.
to a color TV to a reel to reel to a cassette to online to where we are now to, there is more power in my telephone, in my cell phone, than there was in any computer I started out with. And I was an engineering student. I
Right.
started out using I felt like an abacus, but it was a slide rule. And so it's going exponentially faster. I think when it hit the 90s, it was really just an amazing time.
Right.
And I don't know what the answer is to be more resilient.
Right. And again, we don't know. And we used to look to our tribal elders. That used to be the go-to for native indigenous people. Always find the oldest person in your tribe. That's the tribal elder, and they can tell you how to navigate your habitat. They can tell you how to stay alive. They can tell you how to make a living. But now we're not even sure that works anymore. We go to our tribal elders, and they're just as confused as anybody else. But in terms of remedies and solutions right now,
Yeah.
I think the standard go-to stuff is good, whether it's exercise, get more sleep, meditation, I think is essential now. It's not just a supplement for people. I think it's a very important part of a lifestyle that works. And again, triage, scaling back our ambitions and trying to live. Minimalism is a great idea that I think can help a lot.
It's funny because that's what I'm going through now. I'm just getting rid of a lot of stuff that I don't
Yeah.
need. And it's funny, but when I do talk to younger people in their 20s, I mean, not young, they bring up that they do meditate.
Mm-hmm.
I was really happy to hear that. My daughter and her friends and say, yeah, I know a lot of people that meditate. I was, when we were 20, I didn't even think of it. It did never occur to me. And even in martial arts, when we did in our 20s, when we did martial arts, your sensei, your teacher, would make you sit and do breathing exercises and things like that. He didn't necessarily call it meditation, but that's what it was.
Right.
Um, I wanted to talk to you about what I'm perceiving, what I'm seeing now. You're the expert. I'm just an observer. But what I'm seeing now is the lack of resilience. And I wanted to talk to you about the role that resilience, the ability to come back from, even if it's an acute event of stress, but how they navigate that stress, that predicament, and how individual can cultivate being more resilient. Because there's always ongoing challenges.
Right. Well, a couple of things. There is a researcher named Mark Seary who's done research on the effect of adversity in childhood. And what he found was a sweet spot. And this is really interesting to me because we see this inverse U curve and sweet spots all over the place in human experience and physiology and that kind of thing. But what he found was that a small or moderate amount of adversity in childhood is really protective against stress later in life. So there's an optimal level of adversity there. And if, of course, if you go above that level, that's trauma, and that's gonna impact us in a different way. But small amounts of adversity are really good, and that's why sports can be really good. Athletics can be really good for people. Things like rock climbing, going out in the woods, that kind of thing. All of that is good for building resilience later on in life. So some adversity is great, but I think as elders, as teachers, we have trouble fine tuning that for people. And of course, it's going to be different for everyone. But that's a good starting place. The other thing that's interesting to me is that the word resilience implies going back in time. And we always hear this from people who are in their middle ages who say, I'm going to get back in shape. And that's a desire to be resilient, to go back to some previous state, some previous golden age. And that's one way to think of it. But I also am interested in creativity, creating forward. In other words, forget about going back. You're not going to be 25 years old again. And you're not going to be the athlete that you were in your youth. But you can create forward, working with what you have now. I'm gonna instead of bouncing back, I'm gonna bounce forward in time. And so instead of being resilient, I'm going to be creative and come up with some new set of behaviors that is going to serve me well.
Well, it's a matter of perception, isn't it? I mean, if something happens and my perception is, oh my God, you know, I got to get back to what I was, or this, you know, I'm going to use this as a lesson to move forward.
Yeah.
I always tell people, hey, ask yourself if this is really going to matter exactly 1 year from today. 1 year from today, you're going to be thinking about this. If not, you know, use it as a lesson to move forward.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you. Moving forward is always a better thing. You've been to Africa and studied other cultures more than almost anyone I've known. And I wanted to ask you, in your travels, okay, the cultures that you have studied, what do you think was a culture that really addressed the stress and resilience and had it built into, because it is a matter of culture. You know, the United States and Europe have different cultures, but you've been to Aboriginal cultures.
Right.
Was there one thing in these cultures you said, there it is, that's a great way to address these problems?
Well, that one thing would be rhythm, and the rhythm of a lifestyle, of oscillations, of participation and engagement. And I haven't been to West Africa, but that's what intrigues me right now, because I play the drum, and I'm really interested in West African drum culture, because what they do, they use the drum not just to produce rhythm in their own bodies, but it's a communal event. So people come together in drum circles and they drum with the master drummer, or they dance and that kind of thing. That's their community spirit coming together, and then they go about their lives. And that is a profoundly stress relieving practice, because it ticks all the boxes, right? It ticks physical movement, what we call exercise, the enjoyment of being with people on a level playing field, you might say, and making music together. That's a fantastic model. and one that we can use, because anybody can drum. Any school, any workplace, you can do a drum circle, and it's a good model. So
Okay, that's great. I mean, I've seen that done. I've seen drum circles, and I've looked at it and said,
yeah.
I mean, that looks like fun, but it's not for everyone. Everyone has different things. I think everybody needs to find something kind of like that,
Right.
where you are. It can be a drum circle, it can be a book club. That communal get together. Frank, but let me ask you something. We're not all the same. I mean, some people I know are very introverted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does the introverted person need that less, or is they're just not they're just not addressing it?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because as a biologist, I look at people, and we are a hypersocial animal, and every culture that's ever been studied is hypersocial. So yes, there's a range of people and outliers, to be sure, and sometimes it makes sense if we're under stress to get away from people, because especially in this modern world where we are surrounded by people almost constantly, solitude is an important behavior as well. So yeah, but that could be too, stepping in, stepping out.
But you know what? You can do both at the same time. You
Mm-hmm.
can be by yourself and with people at the same time. You and I ride different kinds of bikes. Yours is powered by you, mine is powered by a big engine, but we ride in groups. But while you're riding in that group, you are by yourself. You are not necessarily holding a conversation with somebody. You are just with a group. So you're kind of communal and individual at the same time. So maybe the answer is finding what works for your level of being an introvert or being an extrovert, where you can both share community and at a level that you're comfortable with.
Right. And it's just that proximity to other humans that seems to be effective. They've done studies with rodents, and if you take a rodent, isolated rodent, it has a certain pain tolerance. But if you put that rodent in proximity to another rodent, the pain tolerance goes way up. So just being close to another human being makes our bodies work better.
Is that like saying misery loves company?
It's kind of like that.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. I wanted you to explain something for us and for the listeners. There's a lot of talk lately of having a deeper understanding of the mind and body connection. When we talk about stress and we talk about resilience and those are kind of, people think they're intangibles and just ideas, but the mind-body connection with stress management is so important, because it is causing illnesses that are tangible, that are causing problems. I've heard one statistic say that 75% of all doctor visits can be directly connected to stress. So talk to us a little bit about the mind and the body connection and how that affects us.
Right. Well, throughout most of human history, we understood an integrated view. We didn't really think of the mind as being separate in any way. And it wasn't until the scientific revolution with Rene Descartes, who basically gave us this mind-body duality, and he claimed that the mind is separate from the body and can operate independently of it. And that whole age of scientific skepticism, I think it led us to distrust the body in a lot of ways. And this is a scientific objectivity that says, well, the body can get it wrong. We need data, and we're not going to trust the body the way we used to. And I like science. I enjoy science. I appreciate the scientific method. But there's a shadow side to this, where if you don't trust the body, then you find yourself in the 20th century now, and it's it's an age of disintegration. So here we are, the mind doing one thing, the body doing something else, and we need to bring a reintegration to this, and we need to start trusting the body again. And we do that through the various somatic practices, whether it's conventional exercise or the various relaxation techniques or massage or any of these things, a lot, because the body is much older than the modern brain. And the body is where the action is. So that's the place to begin, is to honor and respect the body. That's where I begin with all this.
I know, watching your webinars, I love the fact that you start each webinar with some little stretching and a little movement, get your body, circulating, the blood circulating, and then doing some meditation. And then we start to talk about stuff because you're more ready to learn. You're much in a calmer place and things like that. I think that's a very good practice. Maybe people should do that every day. What do you think? Start every day with a little stretching, a little exercise. I'm just learning that now.
Yeah, and what I've done in my own personal practice is I put the two together. I put the movement and the meditation together, and I will, for example, move for 2, 3, 5 minutes, and then meditate for 2, 3, 5 minutes. The numbers don't matter, and then I will repeat that cycle several times. And what it does, it makes the movement more interesting and more enjoyable, and it makes the meditation deeper because you've turned on your breathing with the movement, and you can feel it more profoundly when you sit and meditate. So that combination is really powerful, and I think should be widespread.
We're talking about the mind-body connection, and I was talking to a nurse, because the only thing, other than like an injury or an accident, to ever put me in a hospital has been a gastro problem. So I'm talking to the nurse, and she said that in the last couple of years, she's seen an 85% increase in people coming in with gastro problems.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately, I thought, well, that has to be a stress problem, because our diet hasn't changed in the last few years. If anything, it's probably gotten a little better because we've gotten a little bit more aware. Your diet is, you are what you eat. We've learned this. So I had to think, okay, this is a stress management problem. And that showed me right away that real connection between your mind and the body. Also, if you're in pain, you're always stressed. So
yeah,
us taking care of our body is important.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a story from massage school, because a lot of people don't know this about massage, but there is a practice of abdominal massage. And if you go in for a typical massage, you'll get your back done and your legs and your arms done, but there's not enough time to do abdominal. But we had a workshop where we did 2 days of abdominal massage. And so that amounted to probably 4 or 5 hours of contact with somebody working on your abdomen. And the results were profound. I mean, you relax your belly, you relax your guts, you relax your diaphragm and your breathing, all of that coming together with a massage therapist. And it's very much an altered state. It's very much a profound state of relaxation. So that just tells you how important the body is in all of that.
I think the bottom line is that we cannot expect to feel less stressed and to feel that we're managing our stress if we don't take care of our body as well. Right. They work hand in hand together, and they're both. All right, Frank, let me ask you, top 3 things you think right now as a society, or for people in general, top 3 things that are the most stressful.
The most stressful. Well, I would say number 1 is inequality. And this has been, there was a recent piece in the journal Nature showing the dysfunctional effects of inequality. Certain societies that are more unequal have more dysfunction. And the book to read on that is called The Spirit Level. A group in the UK called the Equality Trust tracks this stuff, and they take data from all over the world, and they show that societies that are more unequal are also more stressful. So that is, I think, by far and away the thing that we have to address.
Okay.
The other one is, of course, misinformation and distortions of fact and truth. That's a product, obviously, of our media environment. And so we have to maintain our skepticism and our truth seeking. And number three is simply our anxiety about the future and acceleration that we see. And, we talked about that, finding ways to personally deal with acceleration, including minimalism and triage and saying no to projects that we don't have time for.
I learned that's I agree with all three of those, by the way, and I would put for younger people finances, but that's the fear of the future.
Yeah.
I agree with all three of those, and I think you're absolutely right. It's different for everyone. If it's different for you, because you could be having a health issue, you could be doing, but generally, yeah, those kinds of things, they affect all of us. And there are ways to manage what you're feeling. The one thing I always say is the one thing you should not do is nothing. Because if you do nothing, nothing is going to change.
Right. Yeah. That's
so
good.
Go to stress.org. There are so many management techniques and skills that you can acquire, and so much information, including from Frank Forencich. All right, finally, Frank, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody at the end of every episode. What does Frank do to manage his stress?
Right. Well, we talked about that pattern, that practice of oscillating between movement and meditation. That's a good one. But the other thing that's been influential for me is getting involved in activism, because as what a lot of people are saying now is that action is the antidote to despair. Action is the antidote to stress. By taking control of your life and acting in the world to create change, that helps us to have a sense of control. And that's what works for me. The outcome is uncertain. You don't know if what you do is going to ultimately be successful, but it doesn't matter. It's the quality of the journey, taking control of the process, and that's what works for me.
That's a great answer. That's one of the best answers I've ever heard to that question. I'm telling you, to do something, because you feel like you have more control. Stress is caused by a feeling of lack control. So find something you're passionate about, get involved. Get involved. Don't sit there and do nothing.
Right. And that's why activism is medicine. Activism.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Okay.
Frank, thanks so much for taking the time, for talking to us today, and for all you do to bring awareness and to the issues we talked about today, but also for all you do for the American Institute of Stress. The article you just wrote was great. I want to remind everybody that we still have that coupon, and on honor of Frank, it's Frank 50. You get 50% off any membership level. So make sure you check it out. Just go to stress.org and look under the membership. When you check it out, use that coupon. And that's going to do it for us today. This has been your host, Will Heckman. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget, follow this podcast, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell things. It's really a lot of fun. I want to remind everyone that just as stress is different for each of us, there is no one stress reduction or management strategy that is right for everyone. So I need you to join us next time as we explore more stress management strategies and insights. I'll see you here next time. Thank you all so much. Have a good one.